The first time I heard perfect silence, I was 23 and standing in an anechoic chamber at a university lab. The professor had warned me, true silence doesn't exist, not really. Your blood becomes a river, your heartbeat a kick drum, your nervous system a high-frequency whine only you can hear. But in that phone-lined room where sound went to die, I learned something else. Silence isn't empty, it's full of possibility, waiting to be shaped. 9 years later, I built my own version of that possibility. A $120,000 room built from small checks and big patience, tucked into a converted warehouse on the edge of the Arts District. Every acoustic panel had been measured twice, cut once, mounted at 3 a.m. when my hands were steady and the world was quiet. The bass traps in the corners were custom built from rock wool and breathable fabric I'd sourced from a theater company's liquidation sale. I'd driven 6 hours to bid on a vintage Neumann U87 at an estate auction, outbidding 2 collectors who wanted it for display. I wanted it for its purpose, to catch the tremor in a vocalist's confession, the air between a guitarist's fingertip and the string. My studio wasn't just equipment, it was architecture of intention. The isolation booth's double-paned glass had cost me 3 months of ramen dinners, but it created a perfect seal between worlds, the performer inside, the control room outside, and nothing but truth between them. The patch bay was a Switchcraft TT96, every quarter-inch jack labeled in my precise handwriting. The preamps were a collection built over time, a Universal Audio LA610 MK2 I'd bought from a retiring engineer, 2 Focusrite ISA1 units that still smelled faintly of the previous owner's cigarettes despite my cleaning, and API 512C that had been my 30th birthday gift to myself. The piano had its own story, a 1962 Steinway Model B, 7 feet of spruce and maple that I'd rescued from a church demolition. The soundboard had needed work. I'd spent a summer learning to repair cracks from a 70-year-old technician who made me practice on broken uprights first. Now it sat in the live room like a sleeping giant, its ebony surface reflecting the Edison bulbs I'd strung overhead. I kept it regulated to A440, checking with a Peterson strobe tuner every Monday morning. The bench still smelled like lemon oil from my weekly polishing. My brother Damon had helped move that piano in. Back then, he'd been between ventures. His 3rd failed promotion company had just dissolved, and he was living in our mother's basement again. "Why do you need all this?" he'd asked, sweating as we maneuvered the piano through the loading dock. "Can't you just use software?" I'd tried to explain about overtones, about the way a real piano's strings sympathetically resonate, about how no sample library could capture the specific decay of this particular instrument in this particular room. He'd stopped listening halfway through, the way he always did when I talked about my work. To him, music was what played in nightclubs while people bought overpriced drinks. To me, it was architecture you could walk through with your ears. My sister Lena understood even less, though she pretended otherwise. At 26, she'd built her identity around understanding everything, or at least appearing to. Her Instagram bio read, "Lifestyle Curator and Daily Inspo," which translated to filming herself trying on clothes and pontificating about authenticity while Ming lights blazed in her periphery. She'd asked to do a studio tour for her followers once. I'd declined. She'd posted a story about how real artists don't gatekeep their spaces and didn't speak to me for a month. The studio had taken me 4 years to build, piece by piece. First, the treatment, acoustic panels cut from Owens Corning 703 rigid fiberglass, wrapped in muslin I'd dyed charcoal gray. Then the gear, interfaces and converters accumulated like compound interest. The Apogee Symphony I/O had been my biggest purchase, bought with the advance for my first commercial scoring gig. The monitors were Focal Twin 6Bs, their beryllium tweeters capable of reaching frequencies only dogs and audio engineers cared about. I'd positioned them in an equilateral triangle with my listening position measured to the centimeter. The room itself had been tuned like an instrument. I'd calculated the RT60, the time it takes for sound to decay by 60 decibels, for every frequency band. The low end was controlled with membrane absorbers I'd built myself, following plans from a German acoustician's white paper. The first reflection points were treated with 4-inch panels. The ceiling had a cloud of diffusers that scattered high frequencies like light through a prism. Every cable was Mogami gold, every connection cleaned with deoxit. The patch bay was normalized for my usual routing, but flexible enough for experimental setups. I had 3 separate headphone systems for tracking, each with their own distribution amp. The talkback mic was a Shure SM58 that had been my first professional purchase, scratched and dented but still clear as water. This wasn't just a room, it was an extension of my nervous system. I could hear a 3 dB boost at 2.5 kHz without looking at the analyzer. I knew the exact position where the room modes canceled at 80 Hz. I could tell if someone had moved a mic stand by an inch from the change in reflection patterns. My clients understood this precision. They came to me not just for recording, but for truth. The indie folk singer who needed to capture the rasp in her voice that told the story of her smoking years. The jazz trio who wanted the drums to sound like they were breathing. The podcast producer who insisted that voices needed to feel like they were sitting next to you, not coming from speakers. They paid my day rate without complaint because they knew I heard things others didn't. The red string bracelet on my left wrist had been there for 3 years. A client from Tibet had given it to me after I'd helped her record traditional prayers, spending hours getting the room tone just right so the silence between words carried the weight of mountains. For protection, she'd said, tying it with a specific knot. And for truth, they're often the same thing. I thought about truth a lot in that studio, how a compressor could lie by making everything equally loud, how auto-tune could sand away the humanity in a voice, how reverb could make a small room sound like a cathedral, or make a cathedral sound like a small room. My job was to know when to use these lies in service of a greater truth. The night everything changed started like any other. I was at a gallery opening for a visual artist whose installation I'd scored, field recordings from abandoned buildings, processed through granular synthesis until they became ghosts of themselves. Damon had called 3 times. I'd declined 3 times. Lena had texted, "Where are you? Urgent family thing." Family things were never urgent in the way they meant. Urgent was Mom needing someone to explain her phone. Urgent was Damon needing to borrow money for another venture. Urgent was Lena needing me to like her latest post to boost engagement in the algorithm's first crucial hour. But then Mom called, and her voice had that particular thinness that meant she'd been crying. "Just come home," she said. "There's been an incident." The drive from downtown to the studio took 17 minutes in normal traffic. That night, it took 12. Rain had started, the kind that turns windshields into impressionist paintings. My wipers kept time like a metronome, thwack, 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 while I ran through possibilities: electrical fire, break-in, water damage from the unit above. I didn't imagine my own blood would be the authors of destruction. The police car was still there when I arrived, though the officers were packing up. The door to my studio was open, hanging at an angle that suggested force. The security keypad dangled from wires like a pulled tooth. But it was the silence that told me everything, not the good silence of a treated room, but the broken silence of a space that had been violated. Inside, the damage unfolded in layers, each revelation worse than the last. The isolation booth's double-paned plansk was shattered, safety film the only thing keeping it from complete collapse. Someone had taken what looked like a crowbar to it, methodical strikes at the corners where the stress would be greatest. Glass dust covered the floor like snow, catching the emergency lighting in a way that would have been beautiful if it weren't my life in fragments. The rack gear had been systematically destroyed. The LA610 MKI's view meter was smashed, the needle bent at an impossible angle. Coffee, or something that looked like coffee, had been poured into the ventilation slots of the Focusrite units. The API 512C had been ripped from its housing, components scattered like bones. The Apogee Symphony I/O, my precious converter, had been opened and its circuit board snapped in half with what must have been considerable effort. These weren't random acts. Whoever did this understood exactly what would hurt most. The focal monitors lay face down, their beryllium tweeters crushed. Those tweeters alone were worth $2,000 each to replace if they could even be sourced. The subwoofer had been kicked in, the cone torn like paper. My cables, those expensive Mogami gold cables I'd collected over years, had been cut into 6-inch pieces, deliberate as a butcher portioning meat. But it was the piano that made me sink to my knees. Someone had taken wire cutters to the strings, but not randomly. They'd cut specific strings to spell out snob when viewed from above. The soundboard had multiple impact marks where something heavy had been dropped repeatedly. The fallboard had been torn off, keys scattered across the room. Middle C, which had played every morning like a meditation, lay near the door, split down the middle. The acoustic treatment hadn't been spared either. Panels had been torn from walls, the fiberglass insulation pulled out and scattered, fibers floating in the air like toxic snow. The bass traps were slashed open. The ceiling cloud had been partially pulled down, hanging at an angle that destroyed every calculation I'd made about reflection patterns. Someone had spray painted "Family First" across the north wall in red, the paint running like blood. My laptop was gone, but its backup drive had been smashed and left on my desk like a calling card. The interface cables had been not just cut, but burned, melted plastic still smoking slightly. The SM58, my first mic, had been used as a hammer on other equipment. I could see its distinctive grill pattern imprinted on destroyed circuitry. The officer, a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, handed me a preliminary report. "Your brother and sister are in custody," she said. "They were filming when we arrived." The words didn't process immediately. I was calculating damage, my mind running numbers like a meter. 40,000 in monitors and amps, 30,000 in preamps and processing, 20,000 in the piano alone if it could even be salvaged. The acoustic treatment, the cables, the mics, the stands, the headphone systems, the patch bay, countless small items that added up to a life's work. "Filming?" I heard myself say. "Your sister was live streaming. Your brother was performing for the camera. They said it was a prank." A prank. Like the time Damon had pranked me by telling our high school I was pregnant. Like when Lena pranked me by posting photos of my teenage diary pages. A prank. My phone buzzed. 17 notifications from Instagram. I opened the app with numb fingers. Lena's latest video was titled, "Calling Out My Sister's Privilege. Watch What Happens." The thumbnail showed Damon holding my vintage U87 like a bat. The view count was already at 12,000. I didn't watch the video. Not then. I couldn't. Instead, I walked through the destruction again, this time documenting with my phone. Every angle, every broken piece, every cut cable. The officer said something about insurance, about pressing charges, about my rights. I nodded without hearing. My mother arrived as the officers were leaving. She looked older than her 63 years, wearing the same coat she'd worn to my college graduation. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said, which told me everything about what she'd known and when she'd known it. "How did they get in?" I asked, though I already knew. 3 people had the access code. Me, my assistant engineer who was in Nashville for the week, and my mother for emergencies. She couldn't meet my eyes. Damon said he just wanted to look around, to see what made it so special. Lena thought it would be good content, showing the family you never talk about. The family I never talked about? As if silence was cruelty instead of preservation, as if boundaries were betrayal instead of survival. I knelt and picked up a piece of the Steinway's fallboard. The wood was split along the grain, a clean break that would never properly heal. My red string bracelet caught on the jagged edge, leaving a single thread behind. I didn't notice until later. "They're still your siblings," Mom said, the same words she'd used when Damon had stolen my scholarship check, when Lena had convinced our cousins I was too proud for family gatherings. "Please don't make this public." It would destroy them. I looked at the destroyed room, at the years of careful accumulation reduced to expensive garbage, at the silence that would never be perfect again, and I said nothing. Nothing was exactly what I had left, and nothing was what they deserved from me. But nothing, I'd learned in that anechoic chamber years ago, is full of possibility. The next morning arrived gray and thin, like audio compressed until all the dynamics were gone. I hadn't slept. Instead, I'd sat in my apartment, laptop open, watching the metrics of my destruction trend upward. Lena's video had hit 47,000 views. The comments were split between laughing emojis and defense of her brave exposure of elitism. Someone had already made a reaction video. Someone else had started a hashtag studio sibling drama. But Lena had made a mistake. In her hunger for content, she'd filmed everything, not just the curated destruction she'd posted. The live stream had been saved to her highlights, and highlights I knew from years of watching her navigate platforms could be downloaded with the right tools. I made coffee, precise measurements, water at exactly 195 degrees Fahrenheit, timing the bloom like a recording take. Then I opened my laptop and began the work of documentation. First, the technical evidence. My studio had 3 security cameras I'd installed myself, hidden in the acoustic treatment. They uploaded to a cloud server every 6 hours. Lena and Damon hadn't known about them because they'd never asked about my security, only my equipment's value. The footage showed them arriving at 2:13 a.m., Damon carrying a duffel bag that clinked with what I'd later learn were hammers and pry bars. Lena had 2 ring lights and a phone gimbal. They'd come prepared for performance. The audio was worse than the video. My room had been treated for minimal reflection, which meant every word was captured with documentary clarity. "Start with the pretty stuff," Lena directed, adjusting her ring light. "We need establishing shots." "Which ones are worth the most?" Damon asked, running his hand along my rack gear like a butcher selecting cuts. "She said the speakers were custom. And that old piano, she won't shut up about that fucking piano." "Remember, we're exposing elitism," Lena reminded him, checking her angles. "She chose equipment over family. We're showing what happens when you forget where you came from." "Where I came from was a 2-bedroom apartment where Damon got the larger room because he was the boy, where Lena got the attention because she was the baby, where I got the silence because I learned early that being heard was dangerous. Where I came from was free lunch programs and library cards and teaching myself to read music from books with broken spines." The metadata from Lena's raw footage told its own story. She'd filmed for 3 hours and 17 minutes, but posted only 12 minutes. The rest was still on her phone, her cloud, somewhere recoverable. I knew because she'd once asked me to help her recover deleted photos, and I'd learned her password habits, variations of her birthday, and the word influence. I called Miss Reyes at 8 a.m. exactly. She was the attorney who'd helped me with my business incorporation, a woman who spoke in subclauses and believed contracts were poetry. She answered on the second ring. "I need documentation for intentional destruction of property valued at approximately $120,000, I said without preamble. "I have video evidence, audio evidence, and social media admissions." "Tell me everything," she said, and I heard her legal pad clicking open. "Start with timeline." I gave her facts like frequency readings, precise, measured, without harmonic distortion. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds that suggested she was taking notes. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Facts don't rush," she said. "They arrive. Send me everything. Create an inventory with model numbers, serial numbers, purchase dates, receipts. Document every damaged item with photographs. Get 3 repair quotes if repair is possible, replacement quotes if not. I'll file the insurance claim and the civil suit simultaneously." "They're family," I said, not as an excuse but as data. "That makes it worse, not better," she replied, "legally and otherwise." The inventory took 2 days. I returned to the studio with a clipboard, a camera, and the kind of systematic calm that had helped me mix 100 tracks without losing the thread. Every piece of equipment got its own entry. Neumann U87 vintage microphone, serial number 16832. Purchased 3/15/2019 from Rosewood Estate Auction, $3,900. Condition, capsule destroyed, body dented beyond repair. Replacement value, $4,200. Universal Audio LA610 MK2, serial number M19H2847. Purchased 5/8/2020 from retiring engineer T. Williams, $1,800. Condition, liquid damage to internal components, VU meter destroyed, chassis bent, irreparable. Replacement value, $2,300. Focusrite ISA 1, Unit 1, serial number UK2033847. Purchase new 7/12/2021, $700. Condition: coffee/liquid damage throughout ventilation system, corrosion visible on circuit boards, irreparable. Replacement value $800. The list grew to 97 items. The piano alone required its own subsection. An acoustician named Dr. Sarah Chen came to assess the room. She moved through the space with ultrasonic measuring tools, documenting the destroyed treatment, calculating the labor to rebuild. This wasn't random, she observed, noting how the bass traps had been slashed at their most structurally important points. Someone explained to them what would cause maximum damage. I knew who. Our cousin Marcus worked in live sound. He'd always resented that I'd gotten the studio work while he was stuck mixing monitors at dive bars. Damon's bag of tools, I recognized them from Marcus's kit. Family first apparently meant family conspiracies. While I documented, Lena tried damage control. She posted a tearful apology video, ring lights perfectly positioned to catch the tears without causing glare. She claimed emotions got out of control and family dynamics are complicated. Damon posted nothing but changed his bio to misunderstood. Their followers ate it up, creating narratives about artistic temperament and sibling jealousy, about how success changes people, about how I'd probably insured everything anyway. They didn't know about the sessions I had to cancel, the indie artist whose album was half finished, who couldn't afford to start over at another studio, the podcast that had to find a new home after 3 years of consistency, the commercial work that went to competitors, taking my reputation with it. My neighbor, Mrs. Park, knocked on my apartment door the third night. She lived below the studio and had been there 30 years, watching the neighborhood transform from industrial to artistic to gentrified. She handed me a USB drive. My grandson installed cameras after the catalytic converter thefts, she said. They record everything on the loading dock. The footage showed Damon's car arriving, Lena checking her makeup in the side mirror, both of them laughing as they unloaded equipment for destruction. It showed them leaving at 5:47 a.m., Lena filming herself in the passenger seat, already editing on her phone. The timestamp was clear, the license plate visible. I uploaded everything to 3 separate cloud services, then made physical backups on drives I stored in a safety deposit box. I'd learned from the destroyed backup they left on my desk, never keep all your evidence in one place. The insurance company sent an adjuster who looked like he'd rather be golfing. He walked through the studio with the enthusiasm of someone touring a crime scene, which I supposed it was. He took photos with a tablet, ticking boxes on a form that seemed infinite. Intentional damage by family members, he muttered, scrolling through subclauses. That's complicated. Everything about family was complicated, which was why I'd spent years building walls of frequency and absorption between us. But walls only work if someone doesn't give away the keys. Mom called every day. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that progressed from concern to frustration to anger. "You're tearing this family apart," she said in the last one, as if I were the one who'd brought hammers in the night. On day 4, I made a decision. Not in anger. Anger burns at too high a frequency, distorts the mix. This was calculated, like setting compression ratios. I created a simple website. 1 page, black background, white text. Studio 4A, a documentation. I wrote it like liner notes, telling the story of each piece of equipment, how I'd acquired it, what it had meant. The U-87 that had captured a grandmother's last recorded words to her family, the preamps that had warmed the voice of a teenager with a stutter who wanted to rap, the piano that had been saved from demolition only to meet its end at familiar hands. Then I embedded the evidence, the security footage, shortened to relevant clips, time-stamped and watermarked. Lena's full live stream, downloaded before she could delete it, showing her directing the destruction like a film set. "Make sure you get the brand names in focus," she said at one point. "Controversy drives engagement." I included the insurance adjuster's preliminary report, the acoustician's assessment, the neighbor's footage. Everything factual, nothing editorialized. The truth doesn't need adjectives. At the bottom, I added one line. This documentation exists for legal and insurance purposes. Any reproduction or monetization of this destruction is subject to DMCA takedown and legal action. Then I waited. It took 6 hours for someone to find it and share it on Reddit, 8 hours for it to reach Twitter, 12 hours for the first commentary videos to appear. Lena tried to copyright strike them, not understanding that she couldn't claim copyright on documentation of a crime she'd committed. I sent formal DMCA takedown notices to every platform hosting Lena's edited video. The language was precise, legal, and irrefutable. The content in question documents the criminal destruction of property valued at $120,000. The filming of this destruction constitutes participation in criminal activity. Furthermore, the destroyed equipment and studio space appear in the footage without permission of the owner. Under Section 512C of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, I request immediate removal of this content. Additionally, any monetization gained from this criminal documentation is subject to recovery under civil suit. Most platforms complied within 24 hours. Lena posted increasingly frantic stories about censorship and silencing creators. The irony of her complaining about being silenced while she destroyed the room where I created voices wasn't lost on the internet. Ms. Reyes filed the civil suit on day 7. The criminal case was already proceeding. Destruction of property over $100,000 was a felony in our state. But the civil suit was where the real consequences lived. We sought damages not just for equipment, but for lost income, reputation damage, and emotional distress. The number was specific and supported by documentation, $247,892. Damon hired a lawyer who looked like he'd graduated last week. Lena represented herself, claiming poverty despite her sponsored content. Their defense was predictable. It was a prank, they were drunk, I'd provoked them by being distant, the value was inflated, they were family and family forgave. During the depositions, things emerged that I hadn't known. Damon had been planning this for months, angry that I'd refused to produce his podcast idea for free. Lena had pitched the destruction to a reality TV producer who'd thankfully declined. Marcus had drawn them diagrams of where to hit the acoustic panels for maximum damage. Mom had given them the code 3 weeks prior, not the night of. "Why?" Miss Reyes asked Damon during his deposition. "She acts like she's better than us," he said, and I watched through the glass as his lawyer tried to silence him. "Always has, with her perfect pitch and her special ears and her little red bracelet like she's some kind of mystic. She could have helped family, but she chose strangers." I had helped family. I'd mixed Damon's demo for free, the one he'd never sent anywhere. I'd edited Lena's early videos before she'd decided jump cuts were artistic. I'd sent Mom money every month, automatically transferred so we never had to discuss it. But help wasn't what they wanted. They wanted access, ownership, a piece of something they hadn't built. The brands that sponsored them started pulling out when the full footage went viral. A makeup company that had just signed Lena issued a statement about not condoning destructive behavior. A gym supplement brand dropped Damon, citing misalignment with company values. One by one, their income streams dried up. They tried to countersue for defamation. The judge, a woman who looked like she'd seen every possible permutation of human stupidity, dismissed it in minutes. "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation," she said, and the plaintiffs documented their own actions. The criminal trial was brief. Security footage, witness testimony, their own social media admissions. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was probation and restitution, though the restitution would take them years to pay. But it was the industry consequences that truly ended them. I hadn't asked anyone to blacklist them. I didn't have to. The audio industry is small and built on trust. Who would let Damon near their equipment now? Who would partner with Lena knowing she might destroy property for content? They'd painted themselves into corners that would take years to escape. I used the insurance payout and initial restitution to rebuild, but differently, better. The new acoustic treatment was more precise, the calculations refined with everything I'd learned from the destroyed room. The monitoring system was upgraded, focal Trial 11Bs that could reproduce frequencies I felt more than heard. The piano couldn't be replaced. That specific Steinway with its specific history was gone. but I found another, a 1958 Model B from an estate sale in Boston. It sounded different, brighter in the upper mids, but I learned its voice like learning a new language. The preamps I chose were cleaner, Millennia HV35s that added nothing but clarity. The converters were Prism Sound Titans, so transparent they were almost invisible. Every cable was new, every connection double-checked. The patch bay was upgraded to Bantam jacks, allowing for more routing options in less space. I added a backup system that uploaded to the cloud every hour, not every 6. But the biggest change was the security, biometric locks that required both fingerprint and facial recognition. Cameras that uploaded in real time to servers in 3 different states. A silent alarm connected directly to a security service. The code my mother had shared no longer existed. No one had the code but me. 6 months after the destruction, I held a session in the rebuilt room. The artist was someone Lena had tried to collaborate with before everything happened, a singer-songwriter with a voice like smoke and honey. We tracked vocals for 6 hours, getting takes that made us both cry. The new room captured something the old one hadn't, a brightness at 12 kHz that lifted everything. "It sounds like forgiveness," she said, listening to the playback. But it wasn't forgiveness. It was moving forward, which is different. Forgiveness implies reconciliation, a return to before. There was no before anymore, only after. And after was cleaner, clearer, with better phase coherence and lower noise floor. I did agree to see Mom once, at a coffee shop equidistant from our apartments. She looked smaller, or maybe I was seeing her clearly for the first time. She talked about healing, about family therapy, about how Damon was struggling and Lena was depressed. She didn't ask how I was. She never had. "They want to apologize," she said, stirring sugar into coffee she wouldn't drink. "They want forgiveness," I corrected. "That's different from being sorry." "You're still wearing the bracelet," she observed, pointing at the red string on my wrist. It was frayed now, the single thread pulled loose from that night still missing, but the knots held. "It's for protection," I said, "and truth." "They're your family," she said, the same words she'd used that night, would probably use forever. "No," I said, and the word had the clarity of a perfectly placed high-pass filter. "They're your children, but they're not my family. Family doesn't destroy what you love and call it content." I left her there with her unstirred coffee and her unchanged perspective. Some frequencies can't be corrected with EQ. You just have to cut them from the mix entirely. The industry panel happened 8 months after the destruction. It was a discussion on ethics in audio production at the annual convention. I hadn't planned to perform, just to speak about client confidentiality and creative ownership. But the moderator asked about recent challenges, and I found myself at the piano they'd rolled out for another presentation. "I want to play something," I said. "It's called room tone." Room tone is what you record when everyone's quiet. The sound of the space itself, the HVAC, the electrical hum, the building settling. It's never really silent. There's always something. I played a single note, A above middle C, 440 Hz exactly, held the sustain pedal and let it decay naturally. The convention center wasn't treated for music, so the reverb tail was long, probably 3 seconds. As it faded, you could hear everything. Someone's phone vibrating on silent, the air conditioning cycling, a door closing somewhere distant, people breathing. When the note completely died, I stayed at the piano, hands resting on the keys. The silence afterward was different from the silence before. It was expectant, waiting for what came next. But I didn't play anything else. I stood, walked back to my seat on the panel, and continued the discussion about ethics as if nothing had happened. The video of that performance went viral in its own way, quieter than destruction, but more persistent. People added their own interpretations. It was about space, about absence, about what remains when everything else is stripped away. They weren't wrong, but they weren't exactly right either. It was about the truth that lives in silence, the things we hear when we stop making noise. Damon and Lena had filled every space with content, with performance, with noise. They'd destroyed my silence and thought they'd won. But silence isn't absence, it's possibility. A year after the destruction, I released an album, not under my name. I'd never been interested in being the artist, only in capturing truth. It was called Frequencies of Forgiveness, though there was no forgiveness in it. Each track was built from sound salvaged from the destruction. The glass shards I'd swept into a mason jar became a shaker. The broken piano string became a prepared guitar element. The torn acoustic foam, when rubbed together, created a texture like whispered threats. The final track used a sample from the security footage, not voices, just the sound of the destruction itself. Hammers hitting wood, glass cracking, the specific frequency of deliberate damage. I processed it through granular synthesis until it became something else, a pad that swelled and breathed, beautiful and terrible. I called it Family First. The album did well enough. Reviews called it haunting and transformative, missing the joke that transformation requires destruction first. But one review understood. A critic from a small blog wrote, "This is what it sounds like when someone takes your voice and you take it back, changed but unbroken." Damon tried to claim royalties since his actions had inspired the album. The cease and desist letter Miss Reyes sent was a masterpiece of legal precision. Lena posted a reaction video to the album that got taken down in 6 minutes. I'd registered every sound with Content ID, and her reaction contained enough of the audio to trigger automatic copyright claims. They tried everything. Mutual friends carrying messages, cousins pleading their case, a family reunion I didn't attend where apparently my absence was the only topic of conversation. Mom sent birthday cards with checks I didn't cash, and Christmas gifts I donated unopened. The red string bracelet caught on one of the boxes, pulling another thread loose, but still it held. 2 years passed. The restitution payments came monthly, small amounts that would take decades to complete. I had them automatically deposited into an account I used for free studio time for artists who couldn't afford it. Every session funded by my siblings' destruction created something new, something they couldn't touch or claim or destroy. The studio thrived. Word spread that I was the engineer who'd rebuilt, who'd survived, who'd turned destruction into frequency. Clients came not just for the room, but for what it represented, the possibility of making something beautiful from something broken. I upgraded again, slowly. New monitors, ATC SCM45As that could reproduce subsonic frequencies felt in your chest. A new console, a restored Neve 8028 that had mixed albums I'd grown up studying. More outboard gear, compression and EQ and reverb that added color and warmth and space. The piano got companion instruments, a Rhodes Mark I, a Prophet 6, a collection of guitars that each had their own voice. But the best upgrade was invisible, the ability to work without looking over my shoulder, without wondering if family would return in the night. The biometric locks had never been tested because they'd never tried. The destruction and, more importantly, the consequences had finally taught them what boundaries meant. One day, while reviewing security footage as part of my morning routine, I saw something that stopped me. A cat had somehow gotten into the loading dock area and was sleeping in a patch of sunlight. It was orange, well-fed, probably belonged to someone in the building. But for 3 hours, it just lay there, breathing in and out, completely at peace in a space that had seen such violence. I saved that footage. Sometimes I watch it when I'm mixing and need to remember what peace looks like. The cat doesn't know about betrayal or family or the cost of trust misplaced. It just knows the sun is warm and the concrete is solid, and that's enough. The music industry is small, and stories travel at the speed of gossip. I heard things. Damon was working at a music store, selling guitars to hobbyists. He'd tried to start another promotion company, but couldn't get insurance. Turns out destroying property makes you uninsurable. Lena had pivoted to wellness content, but her engagement never recovered. The internet has a long memory for destruction filmed in ring light. Marcus, our cousin who provided the blueprints for maximum damage, tried to apologize once. He showed up at a session, claiming he needed to explain. Security removed him before he got past the lobby, but he'd left a letter. I read it once, then filed it with the legal documents. His apology was more about his guilt than my pain, which told me everything about its value. 3 years after that night, I was mixing a project for a young artist who reminded me of myself at that age, hungry for perfection, convinced that the right frequency could change everything. She watched me work, asking questions about compression ratios and harmonic distortion, about why I chose specific reverbs for specific sources. "How do you know so much?" she asked. Practice, I said, adjusting the threshold on a vocal compressor, and loss. You learn what matters when you lose everything that doesn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I heard about what happened with your family. Everyone in the industry had heard by now. It had become a cautionary tale, told in green rooms and studio lounges. The engineer whose siblings destroyed her life's work for content. The woman who rebuilt with better specs. The family that learned consequences come with interest. Family's complicated, I said, which was true but incomplete. Mine too, she said. My dad sold my keyboard while I was at school, said I was wasting time on music. I looked at her, this kid with talent sharp enough to cut, and made a decision. You can use the studio on Sundays, no charge. Bring your own drive, save everything twice, don't tell anyone until you're ready to release. Her eyes widened. Sunday was when I did maintenance, when the studio was technically closed. It was my time, my silence, my space. But silence shared with someone who understood its value wasn't diminished, it was doubled. She did good work on those Sundays. I'd arrive Monday mornings to find the room exactly as I'd left it, except for the session files on the server, growing like secret gardens. She learned the room, how it responded at different times of day, how the temperature affected the piano's tuning, how to use the natural reverb instead of fighting it. She learned what I'd learned: respect the space and it will respect you back. One Sunday, I arrived to do maintenance while she was still working. She tried to pack up, apologizing, but I waved her off. I could work around her. I was replacing patch cables, the monthly ritual of checking every connection, when I heard her at the piano. She was playing something I'd never heard before. Minor key but not sad, sparse but not empty. It sounded like recovery. What's that called? I asked. Room tone, she said, then looked embarrassed. I know you have a piece called that, but this is different. This is about finding silence after noise. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. I'd found silence by cutting out the noise of family. She'd found it by creating in the space they'd tried to destroy. Both were valid frequencies. The 4th anniversary was approaching. I knew because Mom had started calling again, leaving messages about forgiveness and time healing all wounds. Delete, delete, delete. Time doesn't heal wounds, it just teaches you to work around the scar tissue. But Lena surprised me, not with an apology or another attempt at reconciliation, but with a court filing. She was suing the reality TV producer who'd initially entertained her pitch to destroy my studio, claiming he'd encouraged the destruction, then abandoned her. She wanted me as a witness. Miss Reyes reviewed the subpoena with her typical precision. You don't have to help her, she said, but if you do testify, it could help your ongoing restitution case. I thought about it for exactly one mixing session, the length of time it took to perfect the vocals on a particularly difficult track. Then I agreed, but with conditions. I would testify only to facts, not interpretations. I would answer only what was asked, nothing volunteered. I would not meet with Lena before or after. The deposition was held in a law office that smelled like leather and disappointment. Lena was there, looking smaller than I remembered. Her ring light replaced by harsh fluorescence that showed everything she usually filtered away. She'd aged 5 years in 4, the kind of aging that comes from consequences, not time. I answered questions for 3 hours. Yes, she had filmed the destruction. Yes, she had posted it for engagement. Yes, she had mentioned the producer by name in the full footage. No, I had no knowledge of their prior conversations. No, I could not speak to her intentions beyond what was recorded. No, I had nothing to add. Lena tried to catch my eye as I left. I looked through her like she was glass, transparent, fragile, and capable of drawing blood if handled carelessly. The red string bracelet on my wrist had 3 threads loose now, but the knot held. She lost the case, of course. The producer's lawyers were better, his documentation complete. But the attempt had shown something. She was still trying to monetize the destruction, to find some way to profit from that night. Some frequencies never change, no matter how much processing you apply. The young artist I'd been mentoring released her first EP on the 5th anniversary. She'd insisted on the date, saying something about reclaiming narratives. I mixed it for her, the last session on a Sunday before she moved to LA for a label deal I'd helped negotiate. The EP was called Inheritance, and every track was about what we carry from family, what we keep, and what we leave behind. The release show was in the studio, 20 people maximum, fire codes and acoustic considerations. She performed the whole EP live, no backing tracks, just her and the piano and the truth. When she got to her version of Room Tone, the audience went completely still. Not the uncomfortable silence of confusion, but the intentional silence of understanding. After the show, as people mingled and drank cheap wine from plastic cups, someone I didn't recognize approached me. An older man, maybe 70, with hands that looked like they'd built things. "I used to own this space," he said. "Before you, I ran a wood shop here for 30 years. I tensed, waiting for complaints about what I'd done to his space, how I'd changed it. "I heard what happened," he continued, "with the break-in. I wanted you to know, this space has been broken before. Fire in '92, flood in '01. Each time, whoever was here rebuilt it better. You're part of that tradition now." He handed me something. A small wooden box, handmade, the joints perfect. "I made this from wood salvaged from the '92 fire. Thought you might want it for something." Inside the box was sawdust, fine as flour. I understood immediately. Some things were worth saving, even in their destroyed form. The sawdust would become part of something, maybe mixed with glue for crack repair, maybe scattered in the garden I was thinking of starting. The box would hold something precious, maybe the glass jar with its shards, maybe the broken piano keys I'd kept, maybe nothing at all. Empty boxes, like silence, held possibility. The man left before I could properly thank him. Later, I learned he'd died 6 months after that night, which meant he'd made the effort to find me, to pass on that box while he was dying. Some people understand that creation and destruction are the same force, just moving in different directions. Year 6 brought unexpected change. The building was sold to developers who wanted to turn it into condos. I had 5 years left on my lease, ironclad and unbreakable, but I could see the writing in the permits they filed. They'd wait me out, then triple the rent or find some violation to enforce. I started looking for new spaces, but this time with different criteria. Not just acoustic properties and square footage, but distance from family, metaphorical and literal. I found a place 40 miles north, a converted barn on 5 acres. The owner was a retired session musician who understood the value of isolation, geographic and sonic. Moving a studio is like moving a life. Every connection has to be undone, cataloged, and reconnected exactly. I hired professionals this time, not family. They wrapped each piece like newborns, labeled every cable, photographed every configuration. The piano required its own truck, its own insurance, its own prayer. I didn't tell anyone I was moving until it was done. The old studio's address had been public, findable, destroyable. The new one would be private. Clients would get directions only after signing NDAs. The location would never appear on social media. Some lessons you only need to learn once. The new space was better in every way. The barn's original beams created natural diffusion. The isolation was absolute. No neighbors, no traffic, just wind and birds and the occasional deer. I could track drums at 3 a.m. without complaints. I could sit in perfect silence without sirens or footsteps or the possibility of family at the door. Building it out took 3 months. This time I designed every angle for optimal acoustics. The control room was a perfect rectangle with the golden ratio, 1:1.6. The live room had variable acoustics, panels that could rotate between absorption and reflection. The isolation booth was triple paned, creating a vacuum of silence that made vocals sound like thoughts. I added things I'd always wanted but couldn't afford before: an echo chamber in the barn's silo, a Bosendorfer grand piano that made the Steinway look humble, a collection of vintage mics that included a Telefunken ELA M251E worth more than a car. The monitoring was perfect, calibrated to reference levels, positioned with laser precision. But the best addition was the simplest, a lock on the gate at the property entrance. Physical distance enforced by metal and mechanics. No one could arrive uninvited at 2:13 a.m. No one could destroy what they couldn't reach. 6 months into the new space, I got a call from Mom. She'd gotten the number from my lawyer. Emergency contact purposes only, Miss Reyes assured me, and she'd be having words with her assistant about the definition of emergency. Damon's in the hospital, Mom said. Overdose. He's asking for you. I sat with that information like sitting with a difficult mix. Sometimes the first instinct is wrong, reactive, all mid-range and no clarity. I waited for the emotional frequency to settle, then responded. I hope he recovers, I said, but I won't be coming. He's your brother, she said, the familiar refrain now desperate. He's someone who destroyed my life's work for entertainment, I corrected. That relationship supersedes biology. She hung up. I went back to mixing. The track I was working on had too much 800 Hz in the vocals, making them boxy, contained. I cut 3 decibels with a narrow cue, and suddenly the voice opened up, clear and true. Sometimes you have to remove things to reveal what matters. Damon survived. I knew because Lena posted about it, trying to leverage his near death into engagement. Family Trauma and Healing, she called the series, never mentioning that the trauma was largely inflicted, not experienced. The videos got minimal views. The internet had moved on to other distractions, fresher chaos. But something shifted in my work after that call. I started taking on projects about family, albums about estrangement, EPs about inheritance, singles about the violence of love misconfigured. The artists found me somehow, word of mouth maybe, or maybe pain recognizes pain even through booking emails. One artist, a cellist named Marie, came to record an album of pieces about her grandmother's dementia. We spent a week capturing the way memory fractures, the way recognition fades like reverb tails. On the last day, she asked about my story. I told her, clinical as a case study. Do you ever forgive them? She asked. Forgiveness requires repentance, I said. They're still trying to profit from the destruction. That's not repentance, it's recursion. She understood. Her family had sold her grandmother's instruments while she was still alive, claiming she didn't need them anymore. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. You just build around them, like building around a load-bearing wall you can't remove. 7 years after the destruction, I won an engineering award, a technical Grammy for a jazz album I'd mixed entirely in the new barn. The artist insisted I attend the ceremony. I wore a black dress and the red string bracelet, now more gaps than thread, but still somehow holding. The industry gathered in a hotel ballroom that prioritized aesthetics over acoustics, all parallel surfaces and flutter echoes. I sat at a table with other engineers, people who understood frequency and phase, who could hear the room's problems without thinking about it. When they called my name, I walked to the podium through applause that sounded like pink noise, all frequencies at once, meaningless until you filtered for what mattered. The award was heavier than expected, metal and marble, designed to look impressive on a shelf. I said 13 words. Thank you to the artists who trust me with their truth. Frequency matters. Then walked off. Some things don't need elaboration. The photo appeared online within hours. At a 1x pace, photographers caught me mid-stride, award in one hand, the other adjusting the bracelet that had finally, after 7 years, started to unravel completely. But what they didn't capture was the text I'd received during the ceremony from a number I didn't recognize. Saw you won. We could have been part of that. D. I deleted it without responding, then blocked the number. Some frequencies you don't let into the mix, no matter how much they modulate. The young artists I'd mentored, not so young now, signed and touring, called the next day. I saw the Grammy. That's incredible. It's metal and marble, I said. Good for a doorstop. She laughed. You know what I mean. Recognition, validation. Validation comes from the work, I said. Everything else is just hardware. But she was right in a way. The award meant something, not for what it was, but for what it represented. 7 years of rebuilding, of choosing creation over destruction, of turning betrayal into bass frequencies that could shake walls without breaking them. That night, alone in the barn with the award on the console and the sunset turning everything gold, I played the piano. Not room tone or anything with a name, just notes that felt right in sequence. The Bosendorfer had a brightness the Steinway never achieved, a presence at 8 kilohertz that cut through everything. It sounded like what came after, not forgiveness, not forgetting, but forward. Year 8 brought an unexpected email. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell the story. Not the destruction, that had been covered, dissected, memed into meaninglessness, but the rebuilding, the technical side, the way sound can be reconstructed from silence. I agreed to one interview, on my terms, in the studio, while working, no personal questions unrelated to the technical process. The filmmaker, a woman named Jordan, who'd started in audio before moving to video, understood boundaries. She filmed for 6 hours, mostly just watching me work, asking about compression ratios and room treatment, about how to know when a mix is done. "It's done when you can't hear anything wrong," I said, adjusting a reverb send. "Not when it's perfect, but when the imperfections serve the song." She asked if that applied to life too, if imperfections could serve a purpose. "Scars change the frequency response," I said. "Sometimes that's what makes something unique." The documentary included interviews with clients who'd recorded in both studios, before and after. They talked about the difference in the sound, how the new space had something the old one didn't. Wisdom, one singer called it, like the room had learned something about survival. Rooms don't learn, but people do, and people build rooms, so maybe the knowledge transfers through treated lumber and calculated angles, through the way sound moves or doesn't, through the silence between notes. When the documentary aired, I didn't watch it, but I heard about one scene. Jordan had somehow gotten footage of the old studio, now converted to condos, all white walls and staged furniture. She'd overlaid it with audio from my archive, a session from before, voices and instruments that had lived in that space. The contrast was meant to be artistic, probably, but clients told me it was devastating. The space looked dead, even though people lived there now. The film brought attention I didn't want, but couldn't avoid. Requests for interviews, think pieces about art and destruction, even a true crime podcast that wanted to explore the family dynamics. I declined everything. The work was my statement. Everything else was noise. But one request stood out. A university wanted me to teach a master class on acoustic design. Not mixing, not production, but the physical construction of sonic space. They offered good money and a hotel, but what convinced me was their studio, a disaster of parallel walls and standing waves, built by architects who thought sound was just decorated air. I spent 3 days with 12 students, showing them how to measure, calculate, treat, and shape space for sound. We rebuilt one corner of their control room as an exercise, adding bass traps, calculating angles, installing diffusion. When we finished, they played reference tracks and heard things they'd never noticed: the pick attack on a guitar, the breath before a vocal line, the way reverb actually ended instead of just fading. One student stayed after, a young man with calloused fingers that suggested guitarist. "My father destroyed my guitar when I told him I was changing majors to audio engineering," he said. "Smashed it against my bedroom wall. Said I was wasting my potential." I looked at him, this kid carrying his own destruction, and told him the only truth I knew. Potential isn't what someone else thinks you should be. It's what you become, despite what gets broken. He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. Some frequencies travel better through shared damage. 9 years after that night, the restitution was still coming in monthly payments, though Damon had missed several and Lena's were increasingly late. Miss Reyes had filed for wage garnishment, but you can't garnish what doesn't exist. They'd both fled the state, leaving forwarding addresses that led nowhere. Mom still called on holidays, leaving messages I deleted unheard. The number always showed up, even blocked, like a frequency that finds every crack in the treatment. But silence had become my fluency, and I spoke it perfectly now. The Barnes studio had become something unexpected, a destination. Artists flew in from both coasts, sometimes internationally, specifically for the room and what it represented. I'd raised my rates twice and still booked solid for 6 months out. The isolation that had been about protection became about intention. People came here to disappear into sound, to create without distraction, to find their own frequency in the silence. I added a small guest house on the property, nothing fancy but comfortable, with its own basic recording setup for ideas that came at 3 a.m. Artists would stay for weeks, working on albums that required that kind of immersion. The barn became a small ecosystem of creation. The main studio, the guest house, a garden I'd finally started where that sawdust had indeed gone, mixed with soil and time. One morning, I found a package at the gate. No return address, no delivery service, just my name in handwriting I recognized. Inside was a USB drive and a note in Lena's careful script. The rest of the footage. You were right, I was wrong. This doesn't fix anything, but you should have it. The drive contained everything. 3 hours of raw footage from that night, plus earlier videos she'd made planning the destruction, conversations with Damon about how to hurt me most, calls with our mother assuring her I'd never do anything serious about it. But most damning was a video from after, the two of them laughing in the car, Lena saying, "Did you see her face in the security footage? When she walks in and sees everything, we broke her." They hadn't broken me. They'd broken things I'd built, but I wasn't my equipment. I was the knowledge of how to use it, the ears that could hear 0.5 dB at 3 kHz, the hands that knew exactly how much pressure to apply to a fader. You can't break knowledge with hammers. I gave the drive to Miss Reyes, who used it to file additional charges: conspiracy, premeditation, fraud for the insurance complications they caused. It wouldn't bring more money, but it would extend the legal consequences, the weight they carried. Sometimes justice isn't about restitution, but about the record, the permanent documentation that this happened, that it mattered, that it had cost. The 10th anniversary approached like a difficult mix you've been avoiding. You know it needs attention, but the thought of opening that session feels like swallowing glass. I considered ignoring it, treating it like any other day. But trauma unacknowledged tends to resonate at unexpected frequencies, creating feedback when you least expect it. Instead, I decided to use it. I announced a single live performance in the barn, limited to 30 people, with proceeds going to a fund for artists who'd had their equipment destroyed by family, partners, or anyone who should have protected instead of destroyed. The tickets sold in 6 minutes. The performance was simple. I played the piano for exactly 47 minutes, the length of time the security footage showed them in my studio that night. No program, no announcements, just music that moved through every emotion I'd processed in 10 years. Rage that sounded like Cecil Taylor. Grief that channeled Bill Evans. Acceptance that found its way to something entirely my own. For the last piece, I played room tone, not the single note from the industry panel, but a full composition I'd been developing for a decade. It started with silence, then added frequencies one at a time. 60 Hz electrical hum, 120 Hz first harmonic, building through the spectrum until every frequency was present but balanced, none overwhelming the others. Then I removed them one at a time, returning to silence, but a silence that contained the memory of sound. When I finished, no one applauded immediately. They sat in the barn that had become my sanctuary, understanding that some silences shouldn't be broken carelessly. Then someone started clapping, then everyone, and the sound in that treated space was perfect. No flutter echo, no standing waves, just human appreciation moving through air I'd learned to shape. After the performance, while people mixed in the control room with wine and quiet conversation, an elderly woman approached me. She looked familiar but placed wrong, like a sample pitched down from its original source. "I'm Damon and Lena's grandmother," she said, "their father's mother. I know you won't want to speak with me, but I need you to know something." I waited, saying nothing. Silence had become my most fluent language. "Their father was the same," she continued, "destroyed everything he couldn't control. I wasn't surprised when I heard what they'd done, just sad that the pattern continued. You broke the pattern by building instead of destroying back. That matters." She left before I could respond, though I'm not sure I would have. Some information doesn't need acknowledgement, just absorption, like bass frequencies you feel more than hear. The fund I'd started with the performance proceeds helped 12 artists in its first year. Equipment replaced, studios rebuilt, security upgraded. Each one sent documentation of their recovery, Photos of new gear, recordings from rebuilt spaces, sometimes just messages saying they were creating again. I kept them in the wooden box from the former owner, evidence that destruction could be overcome. Year 11 brought unexpected resolution. Damon sent a letter through Ms. Reyes, handwritten, which must have cost him since his hand had been shaking in recent photos Lena posted. He was sick, something neurological, details deliberately vague. The letter was short. I destroyed your studio because I couldn't create anything myself. Destroying felt like power. It wasn't. I'm dying slowly, and I wanted you to know that I know what I took from you. I can't give it back, but you should know that you won. You built something. I only broke things. That's my legacy. I read it twice, then filed it with the other legal documents. There was nothing to say back. Death didn't absolve destruction, just ended the possibility of real repair. He died 6 weeks later. I learned from the newspaper, not family. The obituary mentioned his complicated relationships and unfulfilled potential, euphemisms for a life spent breaking what others built. Mom called, of course. This time I answered, if only to prevent the endless attempts. The funeral is Thursday, she said. I won't be there. He was your brother. He was someone who destroyed what I loved and laughed about it. Death doesn't change that. She was quiet for long enough that I checked the connection. Then, I gave them the code. I know. I thought if they saw what you'd built, they'd understand. They'd be proud. You thought wrong. Yes, she said, and for the first time in 11 years, I heard her actually acknowledge the mistake. I thought wrong. I'm sorry. I sat with that, testing its frequency for truth. It rang clear, no distortion, no phase issues. But it was also 11 years late, delivered only after consequences had fully manifested. Thank you for saying that, I said, but it doesn't change anything. I know, she said, I just needed you to hear it. After I hung up, I went to the piano and played for 3 hours, working through every emotion that had surfaced. The Bosendorfer responded perfectly, every frequency clear, nothing hidden in the mix. When I finished, I felt empty in the good way, like a room freshly treated, ready for new sound. Lena lasted another year before disappearing entirely from social media. Her last post was about taking a break from the digital world to find authentic connection. The comments were brutal, remembering everything, forgiving nothing. The internet's memory is longer than any reverb tale, echoing forever in servers and screenshots. She tried one last time to monetize the story, shopping a book proposal about growing up in the shadow of genius and the price of perfection. No publisher would touch it after Miss Reyes sent carefully worded letters about ongoing legal proceedings and defamation concerns. The proposal leaked online. It painted me as cold, obsessed, choosing frequencies over family. Maybe it was true. If so, the frequencies had chosen me back, while family had chosen destruction. By year 12, I'd stopped counting anniversaries. The studio had evolved into something beyond what I'd originally imagined, not just a recording space, but a teaching laboratory, a residency program, a place where knowledge transferred through practice and repetition. The young artist I'd first mentored had become successful enough to fund scholarships for 2 students per year. They came for 3 months, learning not just engineering, but the business of survival, the art of building something that could be broken but not destroyed. One student, barely 20, asked during a particularly complex mixing session, "Do you ever regret not forgiving them, your family?" I thought about it while adjusting a compressor's attack time, finding the exact millisecond where the transient punched through without distorting. Forgiveness without change is just permission to repeat, I said. They never changed. They just faced consequences. There's a difference. He nodded, understanding or pretending to. Later, I heard him telling another student, "She measures everything." Even forgiveness has to be calibrated. It wasn't wrong. Calibration was survival. Precision was protection. In audio and in life, you had to know exactly where things sat in the mix, what to boost and what to cut completely. The 13th year brought a call I hadn't expected, a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Marcus, the cousin who'd provided the destruction blueprint. "I'm in recovery," he said without preamble. "Part of it is making amends. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this. I drew those diagrams because I was jealous. You built something beautiful, and I helped destroy it because I couldn't build anything myself. I'm sorry. Actually sorry, not just saying it. I know it doesn't fix anything." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just acknowledging what I did, what it cost." "Okay," I said, and meant it. Acknowledgement wasn't forgiveness, but it was something, a frequency identified, even if not eliminated. "I heard you rebuilt, better than before." "Different than before," I corrected. "Better implies the destruction improved things. It didn't." "I improved things despite the destruction." "Yeah," he said, "that's more accurate." He didn't ask to see the studio, didn't suggest meeting, didn't try to extend the conversation beyond its purpose. After he hung up, I realized that was the first actual apology I'd received, not qualified, not self-serving, not seeking absolution, just acknowledgement of harm caused. It didn't change anything, but it did shift something, like adjusting phase alignment by a few degrees. The overall sound stayed the same, but the clarity improved marginally. As I write this, it's been 14 years since that night. The studio has become legendary in certain circles, not for the destruction, but for what came after. Young engineers make pilgrimages to study the acoustic treatment, to understand how sound can be shaped and controlled. They don't always know the history, and I don't always tell them. The room speaks for itself now, in frequencies that took years to perfect. The red string bracelet finally fell off last month. I'd been adjusting a mic placement, reaching for the perfect position, when the last thread gave way. It fell to the floor in pieces, 14 years of protection and truth finally exhausted. I gathered the fragments and put them in the wooden box with the other evidence of survival. That night, I tied a new red string around my wrist, this one from a student who'd studied Tibetan singing bowls. Different string, same intention, protection and truth, still often the same thing. The barn hosts sessions that would have been impossible in the old space. Full orchestras in the main room, the sound captured in perfect phase coherence. Experimental artists using the silo echo chamber to create reverbs that exist nowhere else. The guest house has become a writing retreat where artists come to find the songs hidden in silence. Mom is still alive, still calling on holidays, still leaving messages I mostly delete. But last Christmas, I listened to one all the way through. She sounded old, tired, like a recording that's been compressed too many times. She talked about the weather, her health, nothing important. At the end, she said, "I know you're not listening, but I love you. I loved you wrong, but I loved you." Love without understanding is just noise, I thought, but didn't call back. Some connections are too degraded to restore. You can try to clean them up with EQ and noise reduction, but the fundamental signal is too damaged. Better to start fresh, record new tracks, build new mixes. Lena died by suicide 2 years ago. I found out through a news article about the rise and fall of influencer culture, where she was a cautionary footnote. The article mentioned our story, the destruction, the consequences. It painted her as a victim of her own ambition, which was partially true but incomplete. She was also someone who chose destruction as content, who filmed harm for engagement, who never understood that some things shouldn't be performed. I didn't go to that funeral either, but I did play a concert that night in the barn, just for myself, working through complicated grief. Not for the sister I'd lost, but for the sister I'd never had, the one who might have existed if different choices had been made. The piano captured every conflicted frequency, held them in its strings until they decay naturally. Some grief needs to resonate fully before it can fade. The business thrives. I've hired 2 engineers to handle overflow, training them in the specific approaches that make this room unique. They understand precision, the importance of measurement, the way silence shapes sound. One of them asked why I don't expand, build more rooms, franchise the approach. "This only works because it's specific," I told her. "You can't mass produce careful listening." She understood. Not everyone does. The industry increasingly wants everything fast, loud, compressed until dynamics die. But artists still come here for the opposite: space, breath, the distance between notes that makes them meaningful. Last week, while reviewing old hard drives, I found a session from the original studio, recorded the week before the destruction. It was a singer-songwriter, her first album, voice fragile with nerves. Listening to it in the new room, I could hear everything wrong with the old space. A slight boost at 200 Hz that muddied the vocals, early reflections that cluttered the clarity. The new room would have served her better. But then I listened closer, past the technical imperfections, and heard what actually mattered: the song, the voice, the truth she was trying to tell. The room's flaws didn't diminish that. They just gave it character, like tape saturation or vinyl surface noise, imperfections that become part of the art. I called the artist, who'd become successful enough to tour internationally. "I found your original session," I said. "Want to remix it in the new room?" "God, no," she laughed. "That recording is perfect exactly as it is. Young and hungry and a little broken, like I was." She was right. Not everything needs to be fixed. Some frequencies are meant to remain distorted, evidence of a specific time and place and damage. The art isn't in perfection, but in knowing what to keep and what to filter out. As I finish writing this, the sun is setting through the barn's west window, turning the dust motes gold, visible evidence of sound waves moving through air. Tomorrow, a young band arrives to record their first album. They don't know the room's history, and I won't tell them unless they ask. They'll just know it sounds right, that their music has space to breathe, that someone is listening with ears trained by years of careful attention. The glass jar still sits on the console, filled with shards from that night. Sometimes new clients ask about it. "It's a shaker," I tell them, which is true. When you shake it gently, it makes a sound like rain, or tears, or time passing. I've used it on 12 recordings now, always sparingly, a ghost frequency that most people feel rather than hear. The Steinway that was destroyed has been replaced 3 times over, but I kept one key, B flat below middle C, split perfectly down the middle. It sits on my desk as a paperweight, holding down contracts and session notes. Clients sometimes ask if it's from someone famous's piano. "No," I tell them, "someone infamous." They usually laugh, not understanding. The new acoustic treatment is so precise that you can hear someone breathing from 40 feet away. The RT60 is consistent across all frequency bands, something that took months to achieve. The room has become a reference point for other studios, written about in technical journals, studied in acoustics programs. They analyze the angles, the materials, the mathematics of perfect sound. But they miss what actually makes it work: the 13 years of listening that went into every decision, the knowledge gained from having everything destroyed and building it back differently. Not better, I stand by that correction, but informed by loss, shaped by survival, tuned to frequencies that only come from transformation. Some nights, when the session is done and the artists have gone home, I sit at the piano and play in the empty room, not performing, just conversing with the space, finding the notes that make it ring sympathetically. The room always responds, giving back what I put in, nothing more or less. It's the most honest relationship I have. The legal proceedings finally concluded last year. Damon's estate, which consisted of nothing, was released from obligation. Lena's debt was discharged in bankruptcy. The total restitution recovered was $67,439, barely half the equipment cost, nothing close to the true damage. But the money had stopped mattering years ago. What mattered was the documentation, the legal record that this happened, that it had consequences, that justice was attempted, if not achieved. Reyes retired, but still sends holiday cards with handwritten notes about precision and patience. She represented me for 13 years, never wavering, always finding another angle, another approach. Her final invoice included a note. "Some cases are about money. This one was about principle. Thank you for letting me fight for principle." The principle was simple. You don't destroy what others build and call it content. You don't break beauty for engagement. You don't turn family into a weapon and expect forgiveness without change. These aren't complex principles, but they seem to need constant defending. I think about teaching sometimes, formally, at a university with eager students and institutional support. But then I look at the barn, at the artists who find their way here specifically because it's remote, difficult, requiring intention to reach. The difficulty is part of the process. Easy access led to destruction. Controlled access leads to creation. The final truth, the one it's taken 14 years to fully understand, he took everything that could be touched. The equipment, the treatment, the cables, the trust that family meant safety.
But I took everything that couldn't, the knowledge, the ears, the ability to rebuild. But most importantly, I took the story, not the one they told, of a cold sister who chose equipment over blood, who got what she deserved, who needed to be humbled. I took the real story of someone who built beauty from patience and small checks, who had it destroyed by those who should have protected it, who rebuilt not from revenge, but from the simple need to keep creating. I took the truth, and with it, my peace. The red string on my wrist catches the light as I close this account. Different string, same knot, eternal principle, protection and truth, woven together, inseparable. The studio is quiet now, that perfect silence that isn't empty but full of possibility, waiting for tomorrow's session, for new voices to shape and hold and release into the world, transformed but unbroken, like everything that survives by choosing to continue rather than conclude. He took everything that could be touched. I took everything that couldn't, the truth and my peace.